Europe has entered a new chapter of history, with the protection of a superpower no longer secure.
I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You gotta pay.
Countries are rethinking policies built for peacetime.
Strength deters aggressors, while weakness invites aggression.
And warning risks are on the rise.
It is also a time of danger for Europe.
With civilians feeling less safe.
That's why we learn to defend ourselves.
Europe's politicians are attempting a radical shift.
We are in an era of rearmament.
But how quickly can Europe rearm? And will this race to remilitarize really make Europe safer?
The winner here is the arms industry.
The most important thing is we have to stand together.
We've travelled across the continent to find out whether Europe has the firepower to back its bid for more military might, and whether people back the pivot toward preparing for war.
Wyciąga zawleczkę i przygotowuje się do rzutu granatem, czyli przyjmuje postawę leżącą.
We're in Gdynia in northern Poland to meet Patricia. It's a day full of firsts for the 31-year-old hotel worker. Like the first time, she'll do this.
I learned how to throw a grenade. Not my best work, but it went okay.
Patricia is among tens of thousands of ordinary Poles who responded to a nationwide call for civilians to show up and get familiar with military basics, like how to choose a target and handle a weapon.
It's really interesting. It's something different for someone like me who doesn't usually hold a gun. It's interesting and exciting for sure.
It might feel like fun and games, but this is not only about learning how to behave in an emergency at sea and stay afloat in danger. This is about learning to kill. Would she be willing to pull the trigger if an enemy arrived?
Jesus, that's a tough question right now. I think that's why we learn, to defend ourselves. So it's hard to answer, but I think that in a critical situation like that, I would definitely feel safer knowing how to use such a weapon, the moment I had to defend myself, rather than touching it for the first time in such a situation and not knowing what to do.
And that's why Patricia says she wanted military training, to feel more secure as a civilian in an uncertain world.
I hope I won't have to use the skills I've learned here. Each of us should get trained for our own sense of security. That's what I think.
That's something others tell us here. While they're not living in fear, there's a sense of proximity to peril, with war being waged in nearby Ukraine, which might explain Poland's rapid military build-up. Among European members of the Western military alliance NATO, Poland's army is now second only to Turkey in size, with more troops than France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. In global comparison, Europe's militaries are small. China has some 2 million active personnel, and the US and Russia each have around 1.3 million troops, according to estimates. If you add European armies together, excluding Turkey, you get around 1.5 million troops. But they don't have a centralised command, and there are all sorts of barriers to working together. More on that later. The US currently has around 80,000 soldiers stationed in Europe to help secure the continent. Washington has long sought to pivot its military capacities toward Asia, and while there's no imminent plan to withdraw, European allies are nervous about the Trump administration's unpredictable policies and past threats not to honour the core tenet of the NATO alliance, under which an attack on one is seen as an attack on all. Camille Grand was a top official at NATO and in the French Foreign and Defence Ministries. He now leads security policy research at the European Council on Foreign Relations think tank. Grand tells us the numbers alone wouldn't be catastrophic in case of a US pullout.
What the Americans bring is the ability to reinforce swiftly with combat-ready troops, and this is where the Europeans need to put their effort. The military would call it readiness, so have more troops on high readiness that could be forward deployed to a Baltic state, to the Black Sea, to the Arctic, if necessary, at short notice. Most European armies don't have more than a few thousand troops that have such a level of readiness.
The race to change that is underway. In recent years, some European countries, including Latvia, have reintroduced military conscription, while Denmark extended the draft to some women. Germany has also vowed to beef up its armed forces.
The German government will provide all the financial resources our military needs to become the strongest conventional army in Europe.
But estimates from the economic policy think tank Bruegel suggest Europe would need to increase troop numbers by about 20%, or 50 more brigades, to be able to credibly replace the US presence. So there's a long way to go before Europe can claim to have the people power to go it alone militarily. Before leaving Poland, we head to its border with the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. This is the very edge of European Union and NATO territory. It's the conflicts of the past that feel more present here, as we come across amateur historians searching for World War II artefacts. 80 years after the end of the war, they're still uncovering new finds. Helmets of German and Soviet soldiers, communications equipment, badges. Do these volunteers fear another conflict could be coming?
We just have such bad memories with Russia. What's going on in the Russians' heads? Nobody knows. It may simply come from one day to the next. No, we just have to wait. Time will show us. Could it happen? Let's hope it doesn't. No war was ever good.
Hundreds of miles away, that fear feels much less acute. We're travelling to the Netherlands, a small country surrounded by allies and big on free trade. But in an effort to sensitise citizens to the risks it says Europe faces, the government has told everyone to stockpile 3 days' supplies in case of a crisis.
There can be a power outage, it can be a cyber attack, that the supermarkets will be closed. It can be anything.
Survival store owner Luke talks us through some of the items households have been told to keep at home.
If something happens, you need to be updated about the latest news. And the only possibility when everything else fails is the old school radio. Then we have a small first aid kit. Then we have a general purpose knife. Always important to have a knife. What else? We have emergency drinking water.
And so this is an emergency whistle.
If your phone doesn't work, like you need to have a plan B.
Luke tells us his business used to attract people who make it a hobby to prepare for doomsday scenarios. But in recent months and years, he's seen spikes in demand and his client base shifting.
To like the more normal people, that the topic is becoming mainstream. And that's also because of the advice of the government. Like, you need to be prepared. Then we have like a race from 50 orders a day to 500 orders a day. So I think it's also a sign that you could see like people are listening to the advice, people are worrying about stuff.
On the streets of Utrecht, we find mixed responses. Do you think you could survive at home for 3 days if you needed to?
Right now, no, I don't think so.
I think I can. We've got loads of supplies at home. I don't have the feeling I should be terrified for something like that.
And some are deeply sceptical.
In my view, that government wants to instill fear into citizens, into normal people living a normal life. And we're talking Netherlands, which is at the end of Europe. And who's going to fly a missile all the way from whatever XYZ place? I think it's a bit of an exaggeration. And most importantly, we chose the governments to protect us. It is their duty, rather than they put it back on us.
This war would have
never happened, we would have had to deal with
This is an example of what's prompted unease among many European leaders. Donald Trump showing his willingness to lash out at allies and reach out to Russia. Despite the political twists and turns since, something has become clear.
The international order that was giving us a lot of clout and a lot of benefit is starting really to crumble, even fall apart. So this is a very transformative time, and it is also a time of danger for Europe.
Europeans have been left wondering whether Washington would trade in this continent's future security for a quick deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. And at NATO headquarters in Brussels, they faced ever more vocal demands to cough up cash for defence.
Our European allies should take primary responsibility for defence of the continent. Values are important, but you can't shoot values.
They listened. Across town at the European Council, we reported on a series of emergency summits as European Union leaders raced to review and rubber stamp a hastily drafted defence spending plan, one which would have been unthinkable just a few months ago.
Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defence expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe.
EU countries will now have more fiscal flexibility if they're spending on defence, and they can draw on EU-backed loans with favourable terms for new military purchases. For a bloc built on tight debt rules and budget restrictions, it marked a historic change. Almut Müller is a political scientist and director for global affairs at the European Policy Centre think tank. She was previously a top government official in the German state of Hamburg, working on EU legislation.
It's an all-hands-on-deck moment. The political will is there to do it. And in my observation, EU leaders are really determined. These changes have brought Europeans together, including with key non-European Union member countries when it comes to European security. That is the United Kingdom, that is Norway.
Military spending has been on the rise in Europe as a whole since 2014, when Russia first invaded parts of Ukraine. But budgets vary considerably across the continent's NATO members, ranging from around 4% of GDP in Poland last year down to around 1.2% in Spain. The world's biggest military spenders in absolute terms remain global superpowers, the US, China and Russia. But Germany is also in the top 5, and it plans to spend more. Survey data shows most people in most big states back more European defence, but many citizens still want more answers and explanations, like here in Italy, where defence spending remains comparatively low, and where people tend to be sceptical of the military ramp-up.
This could also cause a chain reaction into different nations, spending more and more money into military and then making the situation more tense.
War is a very scary word. War. I believe that making more weapons will only lead to more violence. I think it should spend less on defense. I think there's way bigger problems that need to be tackled.
And that's a criticism governments will face as they pour funds into defence, that they risk creating more social problems if budgets for welfare, education or foreign aid face cuts. And there are others who want to hit pause on the race to rearm, like these peace activists who've spent decades working on disarmament and conflict resolution.
Violence begets violence, war begets war, conflict begets conflict. They never solved anything.
We're in the Belgian town of Namur to meet activists as they deliver a workshop for college students. It's a board game they created to simulate collective decision-making on a fictional planet, designed to prove just how quickly geopolitical tensions can rise, especially if cool heads don't prevail. Who are the winners of this race to spend more on defence?
Whose interests are served? The multinational arms companies. Because peace simply isn't profitable. That's what you have to understand. And if we said, let's live together, we're going to speak to leaders we don't get along with. And perhaps, yes, of course, diplomatic routes do lead to results. But it's against the business interests of big multinationals.
Khadija thinks there's been far too little democratic debate on Europe's planned military spending splurge, with most centrist politicians presenting the policy shift as a fait accompli.
Peace movements are the first to be attacked and discredited. There's talk of rearming Europe, but it's madness. There's no proof we're threatened.
That's a contentious point that keeps coming up. We put it to defence analyst Camille Grand. He says though Russia has shown its army's limits through its war in Ukraine, it's still rapidly developing more advanced capabilities.
The scenario I'm worried about is not so much the Russian tanks rolling on the Potsdamer Platz or the Champs-Élysées. It's really much more the Russian tanks threatening a Baltic state and us being collectively not really capable of reacting fast enough to that and creating a situation that would be very difficult to reverse.
Even if most political leaders seem ready to push ahead with the plan to rearm, it's becoming clear not all citizens are on board. And some warn the rapid shift could also offer fertile ground for future mistrust of governments.
The investment in security and defence is not short-term, it is going to be medium and long-term as well. And European electorates need to be brought along with that, and this, I imagine, is not going to be an easy one.
It's live ammunition, but this is just a drill. We're in Germany visiting the Franco-German Brigade, made up of more than 5,000 French and German soldiers who work side by side.
Yeah.
And that means navigating language barriers.
Une mixture, exactement.
We use a mix. Sometimes we start with English, if we encounter a German soldier, and then we see how it feels and work out whether the person speaks French or German. It's really a mix.
We've been asked to identify most soldiers here by their first name only for security reasons. Sergeant Noemi signed up a year ago, and she has an eye for the differences between French and German habits.
In France, we work in clear groups. We're really all in it together. We've noticed the Germans are able to be a bit more detached or work in pairs, so they communicate a bit more in their commands.
Cooperation is this brigade's daily business. It was founded in the late 1980s as a symbol of Franco-German goodwill. And Colonel de l'Avion says it's come a long way.
Now it has entirely shifted to a combat unit, a combat brigade that has gained a lot of experience in Africa, in Europe, and also in Lebanon, for instance, so in many different fields.
But this kind of fully integrated unit isn't the norm. Though European militaries are constantly working to become more interoperational, it's complicated. Sending arms, not to mention armies, across European borders can involve weeks of bureaucracy. Plus, many countries have their own types of tank, air defence system or battleship. These German soldiers use German G36 assault rifles, while the French troops are kitted out with France's FAMAS model. In future, they'll all use one new type of gun, but for now, they have to train on both. There's no doubt about these soldiers' willingness to work together in case of an attack on NATO territory.
In the end, you signed a contract that you will defend Europe's freedom. The most important thing is that we stand together.
But the fragmented nature of Europe's firepower means that without the US, making good on that promise could be difficult.
The whole model was built on being expeditionary. So being a good ally in the NATO context was being able to send a few thousand troops to Afghanistan or to the Balkans, not to be able to deploy tens of thousands in a collective defense mission on the eastern flank of Europe.
And above all, Europe still relies on the US for so-called strategic enablers, military assets and capacities for the modern age.
It's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, so large drones, space capabilities, airborne surveillance, all of these assets that we see and that are way too often only American or in the largest numbers Americans. And this is where the gaps are the most critical. It might take 5 to 10 years to build a proper space capability that is remotely comparable to the US ones.
So, as European states begin placing orders for new arms with their bigger budgets, they face a key question. Do they keep buying for the United States, which ties them to an unpredictable ally, or take the longer and more laborious route of trying to build up new arms factories and supply chains on the continent? Europeans are split between those who favour greater independence from the US, like France.
We have to work on our resilience for greater autonomy. We have dependencies everywhere. We must develop European capacities and the means to finance common research and industry programs, so we can buy European.
And most of the countries nearest Russia, like Lithuania, which simply say,
there is no substitute to US presence in Europe, to US capabilities that we simply lack of.
That sense of no substitute seems even stronger when it comes to the nuclear question. Russia and the US each have more nuclear weapons than all the world's other nuclear-armed states put together. Global stockpiles have been downsized considerably since their height in the Cold War. But the US continues to station nuclear warheads on European soil, in Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium and Turkey. They offer what's known as NATO's nuclear umbrella, and the only European nuclear powers are the UK and France. Could France and Britain replace the US as Europe's nuclear shield if Washington were to pull out? For now, the number, nature and command structure of French and British warheads, like the ones stored on these submarines, make that impossible. And these weapons of mass destruction were designed never to be used, only to deter. After decades of diplomacy on disarmament, any major change now could test the limits of laws on non-proliferation and raise thorny political and moral questions. And it brings us back to the key unknown quantity in Europe's broader bid to rearm. Just how much of this can be on Europe's terms, and how much time is left to prepare.
If we are asked to do this in an orderly fashion, we give ourselves 10 years. We work closely with the Americans on planning all of this. By 2035, the dependency on the US will have been significantly reduced, but there will still be some sort of a nuclear umbrella. It's very different from a situation where the US takes unilateral decisions and bullies the Europeans to act without having a proper conversation with its European allies.
Either way, he says,
there is no world where there is business as usual, where the Europeans can entirely rely on the US under any circumstances.
Back in Poland, Patrycja is cooling off after her day of military training. She doesn't want to join the army, and in a few days she'll be back at her desk making plans for her future. But she also tells us she has a plan if war comes to Poland one day.
I would take my closest family somewhere safe, and I would go back myself.
So would you be ready to fight? We ask her.
Yes, I'd try.
2025 bears all the hallmarks of an inflection point in history for Europe. Its efforts to rearm are well underway, but the road ahead looks long. Even with defence budgets jumping dramatically, recruiting and training thousands of troops, boosting their cooperation, and equipping them with European weapons will take years or even decades. Governments have many questions to grapple with on the details of how and when to get there. But there are other questions which loom larger, and they're about the why. First, whether they want to achieve independence from the US or put all their political weight behind keeping Washington on board.
Whether we do it to please the US or to be more independent from the US is more or less the same thing. The roadmap is similar. So the bottom line is we should all agree that Europe needs to be more capable.
And then whether this push has robust democratic backing, with citizens split about the cost and benefit of their taxes being used for militarization.
The arms race has been non-stop for the last couple of years. What lessons can we draw already? That human casualties are rising.
Citizens want to live in peace and they want to have a good future for their children. And I think it's important to convey the message that this goes via strengthening also our capacity and capabilities to defend ourselves if we have to do it. And this has become a lot more likely over the past years.
There are no easy answers here, and the stakes are high. With the US approach shifting faster than ever anticipated, and war still raging on the continent, each decision may weigh heavily on whether the rest of Europe keeps the peace or loses its most precious asset.